Well, I think we've got a whole bunch of people here, so it's probably time to get started. Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in the Putting the Policy into Practice series on the Tri-Agency RDM Policy and the pillars of that policy and how you can go about putting those into practice at your institution. In this webinar today, we will talk about an introduction to the RDM, Tri-Agency RDM policy, and about data management planning, which is pillar 2 of that policy. My name is Jennifer Abel, and I am the training coordinator for the Alliance RDM team. And I am here representing the Institutional Strategies Working Group of the National Training Expert Group of the Portage Network. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land which I'm speaking to you from is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. In this session today, we'll begin with a brief overview of the Tri-Agency Research Data Management, or RDM policy, which was released in March of 2021. We'll then move into an applied session focused on data management planning. Topics covered will include takeaway points from the Tri-Agency RDM policy as they relate to DMPs, the importance and benefits of DMPs, how they support research and open science, what makes a good DMP, as well as an in-depth look at their content. Information and a demonstration of the freely available Portage Data Management Planning Assistant, or DMP Assistant, will be provided, including how it can be accessed and used, as well as its key features and supports. Resources developed by the DMP expert group to assist in the development of DMPs, including guidance documents and exemplars, will be covered, along with an overview of work moving forward. The presentation will be followed by an open questions and discussion session. A few housekeeping notes before we start. You have been muted automatically when you entered the webinar room. This webinar is being recorded, and the chat may be archived for those who are unable to attend. We encourage you to use the latest version of Zoom so that you have access to all of the features, including security updates. But if you get a security update during the webinar, maybe wait to put it in until after the webinar. Please use the chat feature if you're having technical difficulties or have additional resources to share. And please use the Q&A option to ask questions of the presenters. Questions will be addressed at the end or during the open Q&A session. You may also raise your hand if you wish to ask a question. Questions may be asked in English or in French. And I'll note as well that the simultaneous interpretation feature into French is available for this session, and that the live transcript feature is also enabled. The slides for this session are available on the event webpage, and you will find the links to that page in the chat momentarily. We are following a code of conduct here in this webinar. On behalf of the Alliance, I want to remind you that we seek to provide a welcoming, engaging, and safe community for everyone. Discriminatory language is not appropriate in any venue or platform, and we don't tolerate harassment in any form. Harassment is understood as any behavior that threatens another person or group or produces an unsafe environment. So please play nicely while you're here. Our presenters today, we have two presenters today. We have first Matthew Lucas from SSHRC, who is the social sciences and the executive director of corporate strategy and performance for SSHRC, where he's been since September of 2015. Prior to being there, he worked at Industry Canada, where he held different positions, including senior policy advisor to the Science, Technology and Innovation Council Secretariat and the departmental advisor to the Minister of State for Science and Technology, as part of a long resume. And James Doiron is the Research Data Management Services Coordinator for University of Alberta Library and the Academic Director of the University of Alberta Research Data Centre. He is co-chair of the Portage Network Data Management Planning Expert Group and is a member of both the National Training Expert Group and the Dataverse North Expert Group. And with that said, Matthew, the virtual and pixelated floor is all yours.
Thanks a lot, Jennifer. Let me just share my screen here. There we go. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep, looks good.
Yep, perfect. Thank you very much. Well, on behalf of my colleagues at NSERC and CIHR, I would just like to thank the organizers, both for inviting me to speak about our policy and our vision for research data management, but especially for organizing this whole series of workshops over this week. We've consistently said throughout the development of this policy and all the talks I've given on this that the agencies are one of a number of players across the research ecosystem, and we really welcome all of the partnerships we've had. And so this workshop is a great example of how the community comes together to help implement the policy and just good research data management practices in general. I'd also just like to thank, of course, the Digital Research Alliance, better known to many of us still as NDRIO, for all the work pulling this together, as well as the National Training Expert Group and the Portage Institutional Strategies Working Group. There are so many people that have been a part of this and just a part of the RDM conversation in general that it's impossible to name them all. I'm going to give a relatively quick overview of our policy, which hopefully most of you have seen some of the context, reflections about our vision for where this policy could take us, comment a little bit about what makes this policy unique, focus on a few of the common concerns we've heard, and then talk about the intersections of this policy with some other things that have been happening in the ecosystem and some of the tools and resources that we've been making available to help researchers, institutions, and the community more broadly implement good research data management practices. So first of all, as Jennifer mentioned, we were really thrilled to have launched our policy on March 2021. You may be aware that we had hoped to launch it a year earlier, and that was delayed, of course, due to COVID, but are really pleased to have the policy out now. As a result of the delay and a result of the recognition that there's a lot of stress in the system due to the COVID situation, we have extended and changed some of our initial timelines. And at the time itself gave us a bit more time to reflect and to make further revisions to the policy. Before talking about the policy specifically, though, I'd like to take you back to a vision that we expressed in 2017 about why we were putting this policy in place. And in a nutshell, it was really a vision to see strong research data management practices accepted as it's a natural part of research excellence across the disciplines. And the outcome of that, hopefully, being that we're going to see more Canadian data sets cited, more collaboration around the data sets that we're producing, and strong support throughout the ecosystem for research data management. And I'd invite you to reflect both today, maybe in the question period, but throughout this week, on how well we're doing in realizing this vision, on whether this vision might need to be revised a little bit, and where some of the gaps remain. And both in the course of these workshops, because I'll be speaking in other events as well, and I know many others will be, but also just in the course of your interactions with the granting agencies, please feel free to get in touch with us and let us know where you think we need to be doing more, or where gaps might exist that we can help support you in your research data management practices. Of course, some of the key changes that have occurred since we articulated that vision has been the creation of the Digital Research Alliance of Canada and the evolution of that organization to take responsibility as one of its three pillars for research data management, and really thrilled to see a number of services and tools coming under the leadership of this new organization. Within the Government of Canada, also, there's been a roadmap for open science. And although our data management plan is not an open science plan, of course, we do encourage data sharing wherever possible. And good research data management we see as is a prerequisite, in a sense, for good data sharing practices. And then thirdly, you will probably all be aware there's been increased emphasis on safeguarding your research. The Government of Canada has a number of websites now encouraging researchers and institutions to think seriously about how they safeguard their research, and more announcements on this will be forthcoming. And while, again, our data management policy is not a data security policy, again, thinking about how one manages their data is a prerequisite to effectively safeguarding their data. Now to get to the policy requirements themselves, and I trust most of you are familiar with these. There are 3 requirements. One, a requirement that post-secondary institutions and research hospitals eligible to administer granting agency funding are required to create RDM strategies, so strategy for how they will support research data management practices within their institution, and to publicly post that and notify the agencies when that has been done. The second requirement is for research data management plans that for certain funding opportunities, we will be requiring DMPs to be submitted with applications, and they'll be part of the review process. And then finally, a requirement that data related to the final output of research projects funded by the agencies, that data be deposited in a way to ensure its safety and to ensure, although not require, an ease of sharing. So again, not requiring sharing, but making it much more feasible to share when that is appropriate. Now, in terms of implementing each of these elements of the policy, there are different implementation timelines. The timeline or the deadline for institutional strategies is March 1st, 2023. So institutions were given 2 years after the implementation of the policy to develop these strategies. And I should be clear here, and I'll say more about this later on this week when I talk about institutional strategies specifically, that we understand a one-size-fits-all strategy is not necessary. It's not what we're expecting. We're expecting institutions to create a strategy that speaks to where they are at this particular time. We expect these strategies will evolve over time. We will expect they will provide us with opportunities to further identify gaps and opportunities for collaboration. These strategies this has become a cornerstone part of our policy because institutions are so well placed to support their researchers in their research data management needs and so well placed to collaborate with others in improving research data practices across the research ecosystem. The DMPs, we have committed to identifying by spring 2022 a set of initial funding opportunities that will require DMPs. This does not mean that starting in the spring 2022, we will require DMPs. We just identify those opportunities where we will be requiring DMPs down the road. Of course, it takes time for us to build these things into our literature. We're in conversations right now across the 3 agencies and with our programming teams to understand how to do this effectively and also how to integrate DMPs into the review process, particularly in that first year where it will be new for all of us. Finally, the data deposit requirement recognized. Most of the questions around our policy revolve around this requirement, and some of the technical concerns and limitations impact this part of the policy in particular. So we haven't yet set a deadline for implementing this part, and we will base that on further conversations with the research community over the coming year. So what makes this agency policy unique? Many funding agencies such as Wellcome, the EU, the European Commission, NSF, have introduced DMP requirements and do require that, at least in many of their funding opportunities, that researchers present data management plans with their applications. And of course, one of the motivations of our policy was to ensure that Canadians collaborating with international counterparts are well positioned to create DMPs and contribute towards the DMPs needed for these applications. But one of the unique elements is really around the institutional strategy, because to my knowledge, none of the other agencies require this at this time. And when I've spoken about this with international colleagues, many have noted this is an element lacking in their own policies, partially because institutions are so well placed to engage with their researchers, to understand their needs, to understand where they are in regards to data management, and to understand what tools and processes and supports they need to manage data effectively. And I'm hoping it's been clear in the various talks I've given. We see the agencies, I would hope, to act as partners with institutions as you find ways of supporting data management and want to work with you to improve data management across the board. The requirement for these strategies is an attempt, as I said before, to simply identify where more opportunities exist to better support researchers and institutions in good data management practices. Another element that is unique in our policy is the focus placed on managing data related to research buy-in with Indigenous communities, that is First Nations, Métis, and the Inuit in Canada. Our policy takes a distinctive based approach, requiring that data be managed in accordance with the data management policies and practices developed by and accepted by Indigenous communities. The policy references things such as OCAP, which stands for Ownership, Control, Access, and Possession, which has been developed as a First Nations data governance model. But we recognize one size does not fit all, and the agencies are committed to working with First Nations communities to understand the role that we can play in supporting them in developing data management policies. So we expect that institutional strategies will reference the need to do this, to work with Indigenous communities and to manage data accordingly. And also that data management plans, any related to relevant research, again with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, will reference how they plan to manage data in accordance with principles developed and accepted by those communities. And similarly with the data deposit. We know much work needs to be done here, and we are committed to being partners in that with Indigenous communities and the broader research community as well. In terms of some common concerns, there are a few that I'd just like to address here. There are others, and happy to address those in the Q&A period later. But the first thing regarding institutional RDM strategies, we are not grading these strategies. We are not marking these strategies. We are simply reviewing them to better understand, as I've said before, and I'll keep repeating, to where opportunities lie to develop collaborations within the system and to fill remaining gaps. We will not be we know that there will be various levels of proficiency in terms of supporting research data management across the ecosystem, and that's okay. We're not expecting every institution, or necessarily any institutions at this point, to shoot for the gold standard on research data management. We know these strategies will evolve over time, and that's absolutely fine. We just want to be very upfront and have organizations and institutions be very upfront about what they're able to provide at a certain point in time, and hopefully how they hope to grow those supports. DMPs, as I mentioned before, we'll be identifying a certain set of opportunities. We still have to decide within the agencies how we'll integrate that into the first funding opportunities. I expect we may not be including them formally within the evaluation process, but perhaps having a conversation with our adjudication committees about how they see DMPs being reviewed. And we also recognize that it will depend upon disciplinary cultures, and that too will evolve over time as to what are accepted data management practices within different disciplinary communities. And finally, regarding the data deposit, I'll say it again, this is not an open data policy. We encourage data sharing, we encourage open data as much as possible, but we recognize there are many instances where it may need to remain closed. In terms of intersection with the policy, again, community-led initiatives such as this one are really a key to improving data management practices and are absolutely necessary, and why I'm so thrilled to be a part of this this week of workshops and activities. We're also, as I said, committed to championing support for data management with Indigenous data management protocols. And then thirdly, around research security, this is still an evolving file with a lot of attention within the Government of Canada and provincial governments as well. And so that will be evolving. And we'll likely see a growing intersection between data management plans and the expectation that research security will be one of the aspects that data management plans touch on. Finally, and this is my last slide, thinking about resources we're making available for institutions and researchers. And we know the resource question is one I often get asked when I meet with institutions, and rightfully so. And we don't have answers to all of those questions. And as the ecosystem evolves with the Digital Alliance, some of those answers are coming. But at least in the immediate term, SSHRC has developed and has offered since 2018 research data management capacity building initiatives through its connection grants. We've really pleased that we've funded over 50 projects to date, and we are still open for business. So if you would like to develop a workshop, a meeting, to support data management capacity or build data management capacity, or understand what data management capacity or practices might mean for your institution or your discipline, this connection grant is for you, and you can find information about that on SSHRC's website. And it doesn't need to be a SSHRC our social science humanities focus project, we are taking a broad view of data management across all disciplines. CIHR also has a learning module on data management plans, and I never fail to thank Portage, which is now part of the Digital Alliance, for all of the work they and all of their different groups are doing to develop strategies and resources. Those continue to roll out. And as I've said before, we could not have implemented this policy without all of the work Portage and others like Research Data Canada have done to prepare the groundwork and to provide the tools that researchers need to effectively manage their data. There's going to be lots of webinars and workshops coming forward. At SHRC and NSERC, we have what's called leaders groups, where we talk to university representatives twice a year. We have a session coming up for them on research data management in our December meeting, and there will also be a Tri-Agency webinar coming up, hopefully in the fall. It may be delayed a little bit, but coming up soon as well, just for those of you still with questions about the data management. And I'm also continuing to meet with institutions, so if your institution has questions around data management, the agencies are also pleased to set up a time to talk to you about our expectations and to answer any questions you may have. And so with that, I'm very happy to turn things over to James, and I, of course, will be around to answer any questions you may have afterwards. I will now stop sharing my screen.
Great.
Over to you, James.
Thanks, Matthew. I'm just going to go into my screen sharing. And make sure that's showing up okay for everyone.
I can see it.
Perfect. Good stuff. And I apologize, folks. I'm going to keep my camera off, at least during my presentation, just because I've been getting some messages saying my connection's not entirely stable, or as stable as I'd like it to be. So just to conserve some bandwidth so that there's not issues with the presentation itself. I'll also just apologize in advance for any background noise. Apparently this morning, TELUS decided it was the perfect morning to start digging up my front yard as they start to install fiber optic cable, which got my dog a bit excited, although she seems tuckered out now. So hopefully we'll be good, not too much background noise. Just before I go into the presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm delivering this morning's presentation from beautiful, although a little bit wet and chilly Treaty 6 territory, which is a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose presence, histories, languages, and cultures continue to enrich and influence our lives and our communities. So just diving into the content, just a little bit of an overview, what we'll cover today. We've only got so much time and we can't do really deep dives into everything. But as Jen mentioned and Matthew mentioned, we'll be having a lengthy question and discussion period afterwards. So we look forward to interacting and answering questions as best able. We're going to start here with some foundational information regarding data management plans, or DMPs, what they are, their importance, their benefits. Then I'd like to just try to overview a bit around the content of DMPs, so general categories and guidance that go across different sections, as well as I'd like to highlight the DMP Assistant tool, giving you some information around how to access and use it, key features overview, and actually throughout the presentation, there's some resources that I provided links to provide general guidance, DMP exemplars, as well as some upcoming resources that the DMP expert group that I co-chair will be working on, and then followed by the questions and discussion. So diving right in, what is research data management? And the short answer is it's a really large umbrella. It spans across all phases of the research lifecycle, from managing data through active phases and beyond. And I realize that for those of us who live and breathe research, this diagram makes it look a lot simpler than it really is. But I think the general gist is there. And whether you're working on funded or unfunded research projects, you come up with ideas, proposals. Hopefully, you move forward and start up. And then different types of projects will have different things to consider around things like data collection or data acquisition, processing of data, data analysis, data dissemination. And certainly when I was first embarking on research going back many years ago, that was around where it stopped, the end of project. There wasn't a whole lot of talk about what happens to the data afterward. There conversations around open data, which were really spearheaded in many ways by the journals, hadn't really started yet to happen. And there wasn't lots in the way of solutions for helping researchers really deposit and preserve and manage data beyond. Of course, that's very different today. And as Matthew highlighted, that's accounted for within the Tri-Agency RDM Policy. And so those are the types of things that we try to address in data management plans. Everything ideally, from the front end right into the back end of the long-term management and stewardship, preservation, access, and appropriate reuse of data potentially. So what is a data management plan? It's a formal document that really articulates both the strategies and the tools that you'll use to implement to really manage your data effectively. And it speaks to management both during active phase of your research and after the completion of the research project. And so the objective really is to try to address issues related to management of your data prior to starting the research project. So why are DMPs important? Well, they're important for lots of reasons. First, as the planning component suggests, it can help you think ahead, and it can help you to set out strategies prior to starting your research for how data will be managed throughout its entire life cycle. And so I think planning is always a good thing. I've always said that you may not have all of the answers at the time of beginning your DMP, but just know questions is important as well. If even the role of the DMP is to provide questions you may not have thought of at the front end, that in itself is starting to manage data. As well, it can help you to identify both strengths and weaknesses in your current practices and help you to make decisions on how to integrate effective practices into your data management activities. So there may be things that from experience haven't worked great for you in the past, and you can account for those in your data management plan, or conversely, things that have worked really well. And if they do and they fit for your future projects, and that's great. And as well, the DMP and certainly the DMP Assistant platform tries to provide really good guidance around specific areas and questions. And so again, those can give you some ideas around what might be able to be useful in leveraging and applying and implementing with your own research projects. And of course, again, thinking about kind of the longer tail, the earlier you can get in and start thinking about your data and the longer management of it, longer tail management of it, getting it prepared for future reuse and preservation sharing, the better off it is. So this can be things around accounting for the size and magnitude of the data, the metadata and documentation, and even what types of repositories potentially or models you might use for the longer term stewardship and management of the data. And again, planning is always good, and can help you to really reduce the overall cost of research by increasing efficiencies. And one of the ways I really think about that is by having the dedicated time ahead of time before you get into your research. You're not trying to come up with solutions on the fly, which from experience I can say firsthand, I think many people out there can relate to this. Trying to come up with solutions for management of data in the middle of the research project, once the data collection horse is over the gate, so to speak, can be really challenging. So just trying to get ahead of that and trying to find the types of different activities that will help you to manage your data will be really important. And I'm of the mind that one of, if not the most valuable commodity researchers have is their time. And so if you can try to put a little bit of front end time to save you that time during the project and beyond, that can be really, really valuable. This is again, a pretty simple way of demonstrating DMP categories. And I'll just preface to say that specific questions and details and guidance for any given data management plan may differ somewhat as a function of the discipline of the research, the complexity of the research, certainly, and maybe the research methodologies as well. But this just gives you a good overview, I think, of the categories, the general standard types of categories you'll see in a data management plan. So they're really looking to address things around data collection and storage and backup of data, documentation and metadata. things around your longer tail preservation and responsibilities and resources is really important too. Knowing in some projects that some really dedicated time and possibly positions may be required. And then thinking about, again, ethics and legal compliance and sharing and reuse of the data. So this really is a bird's eye view of the standard Portage template within the DMP Assistant. And we'll talk a little bit more about that further into the presentation. So when should you start creating a DMP? Well, the ideal is to begin every project with the creation of a DP, so as early as possible, because it really can be used and leveraged to help guide the research process. So I'm thinking about, again, using a funded research model at the time of the grant funding, but unfunded, there's a lot of really important and valuable unfunded research happening as well. So again, at the earliest stages when you're thinking about, developing your project and thinking ahead, I think that it's never too late. I get that question a lot, and I have myself worked with researchers where they've been quite far into the project, and we've had to go in and to some extent kind of work backwards on a data management plan. But again, that was really valuable, and it was really supportive for moving forward and supporting their research in the longer tail. And as this landscape matures, as the institutional strategies come to mature and be released and implemented, and the supports that go along with it, and specifically pertaining to today's presentation on data management plans, as things happen, this is going to become more the norm. And so I think right now, for those of you, the researchers that are out there that are attending today's session and thinking about how am I going to do this, how am I going to get going, now is the time to start getting your feet wet with it and starting getting some familiarity with the DMP process. And as Matthew alluded to, down the road in the somewhat near future, we'll start to see requirements for DMPs at the funding call level. And it's like anything, the first time you do it, it's usually the most difficult. Once you get a couple under your belt, and you kind of are more familiar with it, should hopefully become a bit easier. And you're always going to have folks like the Tri-Agencies and like Portage and the DMP expert group helping to deliver resources and to improve the DMP Assistant platform as an example, and really be out there to help. I think this is a really collective learning process, and it's something where we're all just working together. I'd like to now just highlight a resource that the DMP expert group released, and I've put links there to both English and French. And so everything we do in Portage and the DMP expert group is bilingual. And this is really just a high level around creating an effective data management plan. So again, given we don't have lots of time today, I can't go really deep dives into everything, but I do want to just kind of go over each of the sections very briefly, just to give you a sense of this. And then of course you've got the links if you want the nicely formatted and translated versions of them. So starting just with some general guidelines around data management plans. First, begin every DMP by providing a description of your research project, which would include its focus and its purpose. So think of it kind of like the abstract of your project. And for those of you who have submitted ethics applications, and I sit as a reviewer on the University of Alberta Health Research Ethics Board, it's that similar to that starting description that you would see in an ethics application, just giving us a good sense of what the project is, what its goals are, its focus, its purpose. Avoid using lots of discipline-specific jargon if possible. So essentially the take-home is that your DMP should be easily understood by anyone. And I realize that in some disciplines, there are no other words, but trying to at least give a bit of a lay description of what you mean by something, I guess, at least once in any given section would be my advice, just so it helps anyone that can come in and hopefully be able to read and understand your DMP. And to that effect, here in research, we love our acronyms. I'm as guilty as anyone. But again, if you have somebody coming in reading your DMP and they aren't familiar with those acronyms, that can be a challenge for them. So try to provide clarification for acronyms when you use them. My advice again is do it once within any given section, and then after that you can use the acronym. And I use that line of thinking again from my own experience reviewing both DMPs and ethics applications. You can't assume that somebody's going to go in and read a DMP from start to finish, and they may actually go in and zone in on specific sections. So if you do provide that clarification at the start of that section or at the first possible chance, then that should hopefully take care of it. Don't leave sections or questions blank. We don't know what that means. The reader doesn't know what that means. They're not sure if you haven't looked at the question, if it's not applicable, if you're just going out there and getting information, which is very, very valid to do. You may not have all of the answers. In fact, very rarely do I see folks, myself included, have all of the answers right at the start of creating a DMP. But if it's not applicable, you can enter that in there. And if it's something where you are just kind of bookmarking it and reaching out to experts, whether that's on your campus or within your organization or beyond, then just put that down, and that at least lets somebody know if they are looking at or reviewing it, what's happening. As well, provide rationale for decisions made. So essentially, don't just say that you're doing something. Try to help folks understand why you're doing something. If you're using a certain data collection platform or data storage uses or metadata and documentation choices, then again, just give a bit of rationale there and help the folks that are reading it to understand why you're doing some of the things you're saying you're doing. And finally, and I can't state this enough, again, your DMP is a living document. And so you can update it as needed. And I think that's one of the really important things to, again, understand. So again, research projects vary in their focus, in their complexity, and that can be, from single to very, long longitudinal multi-year projects. You can have cross-institutional collaborations, cross-sector collaborations. So, there's no cookie cutter DMP solution, as Matthew mentioned. So it is recognized that, you may be coming back and there may be changes you make to it as it goes along, and that it is a living document. And so that's where I think where the DMP Assistant tool really comes in and can help support that. It gives you that place that you can go to, that you and your collaborators can work from, and you can update things as you go. So again, I'm just going to very briefly go through my next slides here. I can't go into really great detail, but I want them so that you can see some of the things we're thinking about in sections, but also so you have these slides available afterwards. When again, this is on that resource. So in the data collection section, thinking about describing the data you're collecting, how you're collecting it, where you're collecting it from, the formats you're collecting it from, and I just want to highlight that and I think my colleagues, it's safe to say, use the word data very liberally, and recognizing that there's lots of different types of data. I've been involved pretty much from my undergraduate years in mixed methods research, survey, and qualitative research, as well as working in health research for many years and working with health administration data. I now, since I've come into libraries, been working more and more with different types of data and working with digital humanities folks and GIS and so forth. So again, just note that data is very liberal in how we use it here. Thinking about any platforms that you might be using for data collection or acquisition, including how you might be storing and transferring data. Again, see, these are some of the most common questions that researchers have. And so the earlier you can think about it, and potentially if you don't have that immediate answer, you can reach out and kind of look to find some optimal solutions, the better. And also thinking ahead around the amount of data that you estimate you might be collecting. And the notion here isn't that you're going to know exactly how many gigabytes that you're, for instance, collecting, but knowing the difference of whether you are collecting gigabytes versus terabytes is actually pretty important. So kind of getting that ballpark estimate, because that goes to speak to the types of supports you might need during active phases in terms of data storage and how you're going to transfer data if that's part of the mechanism, or if you're looking to leverage some resources out there, as an example, Compute Canada's rapid access service or beyond, then it's good to know the size of the data. And it also speaks to the longer term management of it and data deposit. Again, how much data are you potentially looking to deposit and make available down the road if that is part of your model? And then thinking about how you're going to be organizing your data and all the things around file naming, file versioning. And I'm certainly not going to profess that that's the fun part of research, coming up with file naming conventions and identify versioning and such. But the projects that I've worked directly on, where we have really done this in the front end and applied it, have really almost invariably come back with huge appreciation for that work and how much it can support their research, now and moving forward as well. So going into documentation and metadata, I used to think I was pretty good at this stuff until I got into libraries and realized that there was some real experts here. Certainly, I've got a wonderful team of metadata librarians here at U Alberta that we draw from all the time. So again, reach out to your experts on campus, organizations. Portage has some expert groups that relate to this as well. But we're thinking about documentation and metadata. It's really describing the information that's needed, not just for others actually to understand and reuse your data, but for yourself. And that could be, down the road. It could be right after the completion of the project, or it could be, some years down the road. And I always try to describe to researchers, and certainly with graduate students that I work with, think of every project that you're working on as potentially being a really successful pilot. And in order to be able to leverage that data and use it moving forward, you need to have really good documentation. You need to be able to understand, to be able to reuse the data. And so, if you're thinking about the metadata that you might want to collect or apply, and there's different levels of metadata, study level, file level as examples. Definitely reach out, and see what kind of support you might have on campus or through Portage. The Data Management Planning Assistant tool does provide guidance and some links there. There may be an out-of-the-box metadata standard. This really can work for your project, or it may be that you need to get creative, and I've been there myself personally, and get creative and kind of make friendly metadata that's a little bit of an extension of existing standards. And then thinking about how you'll consistently capture documentation throughout the project. And that's relatively easy, I think, when it's about automated capturing, but it's kind of more the human-based capturing, the gray metadata that can be a bit of a challenge as well. But again, thinking ahead of time about these things is always good. Storage and backup, again, almost invariably across any type of project, this is something that needs to be thought about, and the answers are easier for some and more complex for others. And so again, going back to the question of the data collection period, how much data are you planning to collect? That can really speak to the types of resources you might need during this phase. So thinking about the estimation of the data, but again, now thinking about the file versioning and backups and data growth, right? So if you are having versions of any given data as it gets processed from raw all the way to master data and maybe whatever's in between, and then populating analytic files from those as well, those are needing to be accounted for in the growth of the data. And again, thinking about backups and such. So if you're working in cloud-based environments where you've got somebody providing services, then those should all be automated and built in, and you can certainly get that information from them. Versus, if somebody's doing it manually and they're working off their own self-run servers, then thinking about scheduling and automating backups would be ideal. But it's just important, no matter what you're doing, to know that you've got things in place that are going to account for things like disaster recovery, and that you do have adequate storage, not just for the starting point of your project, but for the long term. And then thinking about how collaborators or your research team will be able to access and work with the data. It's one thing to have data stored somewhere, but again, people need to work with it somewhere. And so if you're working inside virtual research environments, and I've mentioned Compute Canada's Rapid Access Service as one example, where folks can go access data and actually actively work with the data inside there, which takes away a lot of complexities around transferring of data potentially and those types of things. How they're accessing and working with it. If you're not working in those types of environments, if you've got, for whatever reasons, different ways of working, then again, thinking about how folks are going to be able to work with the data, access the data, and how the management of the data is going to work under that model. Thinking about preservation, we create such vast amounts of information today, and certainly within research is no exception. So just understand that not all data that you create necessarily needs to be preserved. So you want to consider things like the value of your data, and of course there's also requirements such as the impending the RDM policy requirement, maybe pending institutional requirements. And again, I don't think there's any cookie cutter solution, but just again, thinking about the value of data. So on one side of that, I think, okay, well, you don't have to think that you're going to deposit and preserve everything. But on the other side of it too, don't undervalue your data either. And I've worked with lots of researchers, and certainly one kind of instance that comes to mind, thinking about working with qualitative researchers who have been working on pretty niche, yet really important areas of research. And because of it was so niche, I remember one conversation with a researcher in particular where she just thought that, I don't know if anyone's ever going to really be interested in this data, but I convinced her, let's do some things at the front end so that should it come to fruition where, others might be interested in it, that you'll be covered and you'll be able to do so. And sure enough, down the road, because of the qualitative nature and the narrative inquiry, she did find some things that she hadn't anticipated. And it wasn't just that others wanted to use the data, she wanted to extend it, and kind of using that successful pilot analogy. So she was really glad that she at least covered herself for the potential of reusing it. And that's my advice for everybody. Just cover yourself for the potential of how you may be able to preserve, deposit potentially, and have appropriate access and use of the data. And going to preservation best practices, thinking about file formats, thinking about, optimally you'd like to see data in non-proprietary formats that anyone can open up. You don't have to worry about, CSV version 25 because it's open source and it's just anyone can go access and open it. But also recognizing that some research data by necessity is collected in proprietary formats, but seeing if there's ways to have that modified, maybe additionally for deposits, so that anyone can go access and open it. And so really thinking about not just today, but the kind of the 50 years down the road when we're long gone, or at least not involved in research actively day to day, how can somebody else come in and be able to access and use the data? Thinking about things like sharing and reuse, so consider the appropriate sharing of your data, but attending to any funding or confidentiality requirements. Of course, any research involving human participants will very likely have gone through a ethics application process, so those should be accounted for in there. Thinking about what types of licenses you might have on data, like if it's going to be open license, Creative Commons license, I've created a link there for you to look at. And thinking about as well what might be an appropriate repository or repositories for supporting your data deposit down the road. And so I've included a link to re3data.org, which is a wonderful resource. It's literally a registry of thousands of repositories. So it can be a bit eye-crossing in that sense, but I think it's really interesting. And you can go and search by it using different search variables. You can look for just Canadian repositories, certain disciplines. It's actually a neat resource. I'm just going to look for data as well. But one of the big things to think about is choosing a repository that assigns permanent identifiers to data sets. And typically that will be in the form of a digital object identifier, or a DOI, which really supports the discoverability and the accessibility, and as well the citability of your data. And I know further in the week, we'll be talking about Pillar 3 of the Tri-Agency Policy on data deposit, and we'll be presenting a bit more and giving information around those. Sorry, my screen's just lagging a little bit with my internet to my next slide here. There we go. And thinking about, again, responsibilities and resources as well. So often I see folks at the front end and their first pass, if they haven't done a data management plan before, around who's going to be responsible for managing the data. And the answer is in a nutshell, everyone. And that's, in one way, great. Everyone's going to have involvement. But from experience, that at times means that no one's going to really have a dedicated role. And again, depending upon the size, complexity, the needs of the project, that can be a challenge. So some projects actually warrant dedicated time, whether that's a 1.0 FTE position, or part-time, or different phases of the project require more or less. But just, again, thinking ahead about that. And that's some of the consultations that I really focus in on with folks, again, when they're going into larger, more complex multi-year projects, certainly as things get more complex, and trying to identify. And it is a viable budget line, in your grant funding application, certainly as you're moving forward with tri-agency funding. So, it's something that you should think about and take advantage of when you're able to. And then wrapping up the sections piece here, thinking about ethics and legal compliance. So again, if there's any legal or ethical or intellectual property issues or challenges when managing and sharing your data, this is the time to think about it. You may not even been aware of them. And again, I've been there where we've had consultations, and this has triggered some fact finding and confirming some things for them at the front end, which I think is just really important. It's just preparing you for your research and as you move forward. And then if there are any types of privacy or legislation laws And those might come in the form as we move forward through funding, institutional requirements. And again, getting ahead of the 8 ball on those is really important, I think, at the front end. And that's something that DMP can really help you with. And then describing how you ensure that your data are securely managed after the project's completed, including if there's sensitive data, and that can be many different types of sensitive data. And again, making sure that you're aligning with what you said inside your ethics application. And again, the management of the data, that might be data that you've deposited into repositories for discovery and appropriate access. But it may be, again, that there's data that you haven't deposited, but you're retaining for periods afterwards. And so it's just important to know how you're going to manage that data as the project officially wraps up. But we all know that research is never really done. And I have yet to be on a project, of any size that really ended. I think they're always kind of leading to the next project and helping us to inform, as we move forward with our research. So those are the main sections there. Now I'd like to just jump in and highlight the Endrio, but as we now know, the recently renamed, so it's the RDM Alliance, the website here. And if you go under services, you'll see the Portage link to the website. Sorry, just getting my lag here again, I apologize. And there's the Portage Network website. And again, I'll just preface that everything's being rebranded as we move forward. I think we're going to be seeing this rebranded to Alliance RDM is my understanding. But in terms of the content and the various expert groups, which I've put a little slide there, you can see there's lots of them, as well as the different platforms. Those will be remaining and evolving as we move forward. So again, I encourage you to check out the Portage website, bookmark it. There's lots and lots of great resources there. If you go to the tools and resources, there's lots of various types of training materials and lots of releases across all of the expert groups, including the data management planning expert group that I co-chair. And there's a link down there to the DMP Assistant platform as well, which we're going to talk about momentarily. So the DMP Assistant is a freely available national open bilingual data management planning tool that is there to help researchers manage their data throughout the lifespan of the project. And it is hosted here at the University of Alberta Library and supported by funding going all the way up to RDM Alliance and through Portage Network. And it helps for researchers develop their DMPs to answer those key questions, the categories, things that we've just been talking about. And it's also supported by best practice guidance and examples. And so there's a link there directly to the DMP Assistant on this slide as well for you. So just a quick overview and a few points around the DMP Assistant. So it allows for researchers to create project plans, and you can use a generic template, and so those would have the categories like that first, an earlier slide I showed that had just the various categories, data collection and preservation and documentation and so forth. But we've also now created and released a number of discipline and methodology specific templates that folks can work with. And I've got a slide that will speak to that here in a moment. It also allows for researchers to see guidance appropriate to their particular template that they're using. So if it's talking about things like data collection, or if it's talking about things like metadata and documentation, I might link you out to a page that gives you information on different standards and so forth. So it's not just asking a question and dropping the mic, so to speak. It's also providing you guidance to help you answer that question, or at least help go out and find some, some resources for you that can help. And you may reach out to experts again on your campus or organization or beyond as well. It lets you collaborate with multiple researchers on a plan. Again, it's freely available, it's bilingual. You can allow access to anyone to have access to your DMP. You don't need to be at a Canadian institution, you don't need to be in Canada, it's cross-sector. Anyone can literally create the account and you can work with anyone on your DMP. And again, you can connect to local guidance and support for data management at your academic institutions. And to that end, when we think about what institutions can do with it, and I'm thinking about my colleagues at various institutions across Canada that are helping to administer locally the DMP Assistant, they're able to customize the Portage template for their own institution. They're able to go in and create institution-specific templates and guidance, so things that might be pertaining specifically to their institution or things that they want to highlight for the researchers that are going to be coming in and using the DMP Assistant, as well as to view information about DMP Assistant usage at their institution. Would be important as things move forward and as we start to see requirements, come forth moving forward. So some of the key features of the DMP Assistant, again, I've mentioned it supports cross-institutional research collaboration and really cross-sector, as again, anyone can really go and create that account. It's freely available to end users. I can speak firsthand, given that it's hosted here at U of A. It's not free to run, and it takes a lot under the hood, and I work with a great team both here at the U of A as well as with Portage and beyond, and with the expert group, but it's always going to be free for the end users to go in and use, so no cost to yourselves. Again, it's web-based and bilingual. It is endorsed by the Tri-Agency, which we're really happy to see. We saw that in the draft policy, and they've kept mentioning us in the now fully released policy, and it's really nice to be able to be working with them on it at the front end and collaborating. A great group of folks to work with, and I know that we're all really learning together a bit around this, including the researchers, the funders, the institutions. So it's great to be able to working with within that model. Again, I've mentioned this a few times. It doesn't just ask the question; it provides guidance and examples. And you can have as many DMPs as you want. I have yet to find the ceiling. So, feel free to try. But just like you can be involved in many different research projects simultaneously in different ways, so too can you have many DMPs. And you may be working with those in different ways as well. It may be that you're the PI, and you might be the co-owner or an owner of a DMP. You might be an editor of it. I've come in as a consultant or, providing expert guidance and had, all of these roles, as well as potentially read only. I've been given those where they just want me to read and give some feedback, or when you have incoming trainees and graduate students, it's nice to be able to provide to them DMPs pertaining to the research you've conducted, so they can kind of get up to speed, or help them develop their own. You're able to export the DMPs into lots of different popular formats, including PDF and text and Microsoft Word, which is just a nice feature. Again, if you go through the data management plan and you've ever filled out, for instance, an ethics application, you'll notice that lots of the questions, information providing might be duplicated in both. And so if you can export out from the DMP, assuming that you've done that earlier, and then be able to put that into your ethics application. And there may be some, some wordsmithing to do or such polishing up, but at least you're not starting from scratch. So that's a nice thing as well. And we said it before, it's a living document. So this is the place that you can go back to, and you can capture information and you can modify it as you need moving forward. So here's a screenshot of the DMP Assistant homepage, and that is a link to the top there for you to be able to go in. You can just simply go in and create an account with it, and away you go. And there's some information links right on the landing page to give you some of the resources that I've talked to and will be talking to, as well as external resources as well. And just up at the top, you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor moving, but at the top right of the page, you can choose your language. So of course, right now I'm showing it in English, but I've got a separate set of slides that I understand Jen's made available that shows French as well, and those will be made available for you. So upon signing in, you can either access an existing DMP, and so you can see the top arrow pointing to a bunch of my DMPs, some of them anyways. And so if I'm going to go in and work on those, I can click on it and away I go, or I can go in and create a new plan if that's what I'm doing. I can go and I can actually copy or clone an existing DMP as well, which is really nice. It was a feature that came with our recently, this past spring, released DMP System 2.0. So we recognize that many researchers conduct, separate, at least, separate research projects. They're probably related in many ways, but separate, yet very similar to other projects they've embarked on. And so it may be that lots of the things that they've written into an existing DMP will be the same, moving forward in their DMP. So if you're able to copy or clone an existing DMP so that you're not starting from scratch, that's actually a really nice, just pragmatic support feature, I think. When you're creating a new plan, you can go in and select a new template. So there's a bit of required information. You're going to indicate what the research project you're planning is, and you're going to indicate the primary research organization. So in this case, I would be choosing University of Alberta. And then at this point, which DMP template would you like to use? And I mentioned there's the Portage generic template, but you can also now go in and choose from, there's 13 additional templates that are based on various research disciplines and methodologies. So it's nice to be able to see those. And on the Portage page, you can actually go there outside of the DMP Assistant platform and see those templates and review them. So you can advance, actually get an idea of whether there's one outside of the generic template that would be a better fit for your project. And so this slide just gives you a little bit of an overview of that, as well as the link to there. So there's a great mix of templates, and I anticipate we'll see more coming down the road. I was involved in authoring the mixed methods surveys and qualitative research template, as well as co-authored the arts-based research one. Colleagues have worked on ones around a wide range. CRDCN now has some templates in there: history and humanities, systematic reviews, neuroimaging, neurosciences, and so forth. So again, it may be that the generic template's the best fit. It may be that one of these existing templates is a better fit. And again, these are going to be evolving, and we'll see them, I think, improving, but also new templates coming. Each DMP has a study level information associated with it. So you can put in things like, the project title. You can choose at the time of creation, and you can change it later as well, what the visibility will be, if it's going to be private, just restricted to yourself and the people you invite. Maybe that is how it will remain, or maybe that's how it's going to be for a period of time. And then later on, you might open it up, might become public down the road. And you can involve a project abstract in there. You can indicate if there's a funder or a grant number in there, the principal investigator. And again, any of this information is modifiable. You can go back and always modify metadata at the DMP study level. You can choose to answer questions in any given time for any given section, and these categories will look familiar. Those are exactly the same categories you spoke to in that early slide with that kind of big bird's eye view. So I can essentially go into any section, and to the right, you'll see the plus signs. I can click on that plus sign. It'll open up the section. And then for any given section, I can see that I've got space to go and answer the question, as well as to the right, there's the customized guidance. And so different ones will have different information. We might have links there. As we mentioned previously, institutions have the ability to customize their guidance, which I think is great. So it may be that there's some resources here specifically on the University of Alberta campus that I want to make researchers aware of here, but it is specific to U of A, then I can add that within the customized guidance that we provide to our researchers. I also, going back to the space where we go and can enter in information, you'll notice the little toolbar there that is very familiar to anyone who has used a Word document or Google Docs, and that's not fancy bells and whistles. It's just really pragmatic support. I myself use tables and hyperlinks and bullet points, all those types of things that the toolbar allows for all the time within documents, and certainly within DMPs. So it's great to just have them built right into the platform. I mentioned you can easily add collaborators to DMP. So again, you can just go in and add them in there by their email address. If they and you can apply their permission settings. So co-owner, editor, read only is the existing permission settings at this time. If they have an existing account, then they will get a notification, and then when they sign into DMP Assistant, they'll automatically have access to that DMP. If they don't have an account, they'll similarly get that email, and that will be their prod to go and make themselves a free account. There's a range of options, as I mentioned, for formatting and downloading. So there's a few there in terms of formatting, if you have font preferences and size and margins and those types of things. And then you can see some of the formats that you're able to download in, including PDF and text and Word doc. And as we wrap up the slide portion, I just want to give a shout out to my colleagues in the Portage DMP expert group. We've got a great group. It's one of the earliest, or if it might even be the earliest, Portage expert group. So that's been going for a number of years now. And it's really, where we come together and we're folks that are out there helping to deliver research data management, DMP services at our respective institutions and organizations. And we come together to really help to try to develop resources, guidelines, best practices, things that can, benefit the large community, but also come back and bring to our own institutions. We've released a number of resources. I've showed you one in the effective DMP. We've also got some tutorial videos that are being worked on right now that are coming up. Those involve introducing to DMPs, so kind of similar to some of the things I've been talking about in today's presentation, but even expanding beyond. We've got an introduction to the DMP Assistant tutorial video that is literally being formatted and translated, I believe, at this time. So that will be really a nice addition to our resources out there. updated institutional administrator guide. So that's more for the colleagues and the folks who are out there delivering the DMP Assistant as a platform of service. And it's got a little bit of a learning curve to it, not too steep, but if you really want to leverage and take advantage of any platform, having a good guide to help support you and to help show you what to do and how to really take advantage and make the most of it is really important. So we're looking forward to seeing that released fairly soon. As well, we want to see more DMP exemplars released. So those are good kind of gold standard DMPs out there that can act as guides for folks and lots more. And so talking about the DMP exemplars, the DMP expert group has now released over 2 working group calls where we've worked directly with researchers on the second one. In particular, we've now released a number, I think there's 9 there, DMP exemplars, and those currently span across 4 categories: digital humanities, mixed methods, natural sciences, and social sciences. And so there's the links there to all of those DMPs. Because essentially the question, that comes, and very reasonably so from researchers, is great. I have to create a DMP. Do you have an example? Do you have good examples? And recognizing that that's an easier ask than we'd like it to be, maybe, but because there is no cookie cutter DMP, and because things do differ by discipline and methodologies. So this has been a start. I just want to highlight, though, that the French slides that I've created have all of these in there and the links to their French versions. Everything is bilingual that we've released in Portage. And here's just an example of what those look like. So it gives you, a nice formatted data management plan with the details inside. There's little call outs on the side as well. This particular image doesn't show it, but where we'll maybe explain why something was important to highlight, or things to think about as you're moving forward with the development of your own DMP. If you're interested in learning more about using the DMP Assistant firsthand, you can also access and view the below webinar. It was presented by my colleague and friend, Robin Nicholson, who's the DMP coordinator for now the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So there you go. There's a link to it, along with lots of other great webinars that have been developed and released. I'm just going to end off with just a little bit of a shout out to the DMP Assistant Steering Committee. This is I'll say a relatively new committee in the sense that it was launched officially, I think in January of this year, where it provides essential guidance and support and direction on the development of the DMP Assistant, including lots of new features that will be coming and proposed features. So those might be things like API integration with other systems. So think about as requirements come down the road, some of the big questions are how are we going to support implementing and support the requirement of DMPs in our campus? And, there may be different entities involved. I know certainly thinking about the University of Alberta, having the Research Services Office might have some involvement there in supporting it, at least ensuring that, if there's a requirement at the funding level, that a checkbox is there, that they have demonstrated they've at least created one. I'm not talking about reviewing it or anything at this stage, but just even, acknowledging it's there. And then there may be some supports there around getting in and accessing and reviewing DMPs moving forward as well. And so we want to take full advantage of the technology we have and be able to really support that platform and that, as well as looking at how we review and evaluate DMPs. And this is going to be a bit of a learning for many. And so we're just starting to kind of break the seal on some of that work, and we'll work closely, not just within the DMP Assistant Steering Committee and the expert group, but with the funders and with the Tri-Agency on that as well. We're also looking forward to building a DMP repository with DMP Assistant integration. So folks want to deposit and make available their DMPs down the road, or in some cases there may be requirements down the road too. I'm just reading tea leaves a bit, but again, we want to be able to have the ability for folks to very easily do that. And if they choose to use a supported repository that we link up with DMP Assistant, then that's fantastic. As well as DMP versioning, recognizing, again, going back to the notion that it's a living document, there may be some need, or at least some usefulness out of being able to version DMP. So it might be that you have a DMP created, you make some minor changes, and then that is captured as a 1.1 version. And you may conversely go and make some major changes, and maybe that's captured as a 2.0 version, but you retain all versions so that you have a little bit of a breadcrumb trail and some provenance around that. So again, that can be quite important. I will note that the steering committee is made up of a lot of various stakeholders. So we've got folks from across the Portage Secretariat, the DMP expert group, the host institution, as well as the tri-agencies. We have representation from each SHRC, CHR, and NSERC, as well as representation from the First Nations Information Governance Center. So it's really, really great. We've been slowly kind of finding our way with it and how we want to run those meetings. They're quarterly meetings. It's coming together, and really look forward to working with those folks moving forward. And some of the other components there around leveraging the power of persistent identifiers and machine actionable DMPs is one of the big asks there, which is painless if you say it fast enough. There's a lot to that, but just so much going on. And I think that we feel that we've got an infinite number, an amount of work that we could be working on. And of course, there's always finite resources and time. So it's really important for us to have things like the steering committee and the expert group on board helping us with things. And sorry, my screen is lagged again, so I'm going to stop sharing there now. I realize we went a little bit over, but we have our question period time as well. I will open up my my camera so you can see who's been talking this whole time. And I know that's lots of information, but I hope it was a good kind of bird's eye presentation for you that gives you some good foundational information, some links to resources, to the DMP Assistant, slides and recording of the sessions being available. So you'll have them to access later. And I'll stop there and pass it back over to Jen to moderate. I suspect we might have some questions in the chat. And I'll be happy to take all the easy ones, and I'll pass the hard ones over to Matthew. We'll go from there.